there. I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. I'm dropping into your podcast feed if you're getting this over audio because we're trying some interstitial interviews in time, or if you're watching live on LinkedIn, or you're not watching this live at all, and instead you're going to see it in a news story. Thanks for being here. We are super interested in business incubation. It is a concept. It is a movement. And there is one kind of granddaddy of business incubation. It's the International Business Innovation Association. And NBIA's president and CEO is Charles Ross, who's going to join me for conversation. Charles, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chris, so much. Looking forward to our conversation.
Indeed. Now, the time hook here is that you guys have a well-regarded conference coming up in just a couple weeks. It'll happen to be, coincidentally enough, in my hometown of Philadelphia. But it'll be the 39th year. So we're kind of using your conference as a time hook to also look a little bit more widely at where business incubation came from and where it's going next. And I can't think of any better steward of that than you. So can you start me with some of the basics, knowing what you do about NBIA's origins as an organization, but perhaps its conference 39 years ago? Tell us a little bit about why you started then, what the group was doing, what incubation looked like in the mid-1980s, and we'll take it forward from there.
Sure. Well, again, thanks so much for allowing me to share some time here on this podcast and speak to your audience. We're really excited about coming to Philadelphia. We're going to be in Philadelphia from April 6th to the 9th with our 39th annual conference. And it's amazing that it's been almost 40 years that we've been celebrating this programmatic approach to supporting entrepreneurs. And while NBIA was founded back in 1985, at that point in time, we actually had, our name was the National Business Incubation Association. It was really formed as critical mass was occurring with a way of supporting entrepreneurs, business incubation. It really started in the late 50s, early 1960s as a way for communities to deal with dislocations that they were having with major employers and major industries in their communities, and what they were going to do with excess real estate that those organizations had. And it's interesting because probably many of our communities now, with the move back to, or the move to more work at home, are probably looking at a similar challenges. But one of the things during that time that became attractive was subdividing space and marketing that space to more smaller growth companies. But it became clear that you needed to provide more than just space. You needed to provide access to connections to capital and assistance to help those companies survive and thrive, because we all know about how challenging it is to be a small and early company, and that's how the industry was born.
You're bringing to mind the economist Bradford DeLong has the great book Slouching Towards Utopia. I think it's 2023, 2024. But he writes about how that tail end of the Industrial Revolution, late 19th century, early 20th century even, we had by that point invented invention, is his phrase. And this is like kind of Edison actually is better known for more like commercializing research and development. And then the painful but militaristic buildup in the First and Second World War kind of teaches about industry and what the state has a role there. Then we kind of evolve into economic development post World War II. And so you add some nuance to me that I appreciate, that we see in that kind of like 50s, post 50s boom, growth slowing a little bit, but 60s and 70s, we're thinking a lot about how we can build the economies we want. And incubation, you're kind of telling me, kind of starts getting a little seedlings there. And then by the 1980s, we have leadership around the country that says we know how to help those fledgling businesses advance faster by avoiding some pitfalls. Were there geographic hubs? Like, I actually don't quite know. Where did NBI first coalesce? Was there a certain place, or was it kind of distributed around the country? What is the geographic origins of the movement look like?
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm really excited about. So this industry from its start was fairly well dispersed across the United States. I don't know all of the specific details around the history. I do know that we were initially founded in the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
And one of our earliest first chair of our board is Dr. Randall M. Whaley, who
Mm,
was the executive director of the University Science Center back in the
mm.
80s. He was our first chairman from like 85 to 80, 88. But during that time, you had places in Indiana, you had places in or programs in Milwaukee. So not in those necessarily those cities that you would think of as maybe like hotbeds for startups in the 80s.
Yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, there is these like industrial hubs in the industrial wave begin to try to change, grab hold of the next wave. Okay, that's great. Thanks for that history lesson. I always love to see how these various corners of economic development come together, and business incubation's been a part of it. Let's talk a bit about where you are now.
Sure.
We've had a lot of change over 40 years. You beforehand noted that sometimes incubation gets kind of like lumped together with tech and innovation. And of course it's related, but not only that.
Right.
Entrepreneurship has been a very widespread boom here in the pandemic. So talk to me a little bit about what are you hearing from your members, which are the incubators themselves? What are you hearing from them in terms of what they need? And how is that showing up in the conference you have in a couple weeks?
Sure. So, typically, when we survey our members and understand kind of what's on their mind, and since I've been a part of the staff here at NBIA, and I'll just share a little context that I've been in the industry of entrepreneurial support since 2005, and previous to that, I was working directly with entrepreneurs in the private equity space. Did some work at a corporate venture capital group and then a public-private venture capital group. So I've been working with entrepreneurs since like the mid 90s. And but since I've been a part of the staff here at NBIA for about the past 6 years, consistent themes, 3 areas. 2 are focused on or connected to show me the money and funding. So it's funding probably primarily for our clients, for the entrepreneurs. How do I get more capital to those entrepreneurs? Second, how do I get more funding for our programs, for the actual programs themselves? And then third is how can our members take advantage of programming to help them assist their entrepreneurs directly to be more effective there. So those have been the three consistent themes over the past several years. They may shift, between 1, 2, or 3, but all 3 of those are usually top of the list.
Charles, help do some armchair theorizing for me about why we had the entrepreneurship boom in the pandemic. We all have this kind of fuzzy narrative in our heads of like stuff changed. And I have a couple little pet theories, but you as like a longtime organizer, far outpacing me in entrepreneurial support. For so many decades, we had declining rates of entrepreneurship. We had technically references a lot in our reporting. I'm pretty obsessed with it. That sitting in 2019, despite all of our efforts, the narrative was millennials at that point looked like the least entrepreneurial generation in American history. And Americans had lost their dynamism. And all of the narratives were entrepreneurship is continuing to sink and reaching new low points post Great Recession. And then, holy heck, we went into this now coming on 5-year pop of entrepreneurship rates. And we keep trying to explain it away in different reasons. And I'm perennially waiting for, is this still a pandemic blip and it's going to sink back? Or is it a paradigm shift and we climb out? So I'm just kind of curious, what's your narrative as a guy who was at this for so long when rates kept declining? You were still doing important work. Why do we have that moment? Do you think it's a blip? Do you think it's a paradigm shift? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some shifts that are underway and playing a role in terms of just. I think we were seeing activities of some of these drivers around being more and more or less and less barriers around starting up a new company in terms of the cost associated with starting up a new company. And then also around the availability, I think, of information that would help entrepreneurs launch and build companies. You think about the proliferation of methodologies like the business model canvas and the lean startup method, and I would say just kind of the expansion of those techniques beyond just high tech entrepreneurship and being applied to other types of ventures. And so I think those things just kind of coincided with the fact that you had an uptick definitely in opportunity, necessity entrepreneurs, right? So we've talked about in our industry about opportunity entrepreneurs versus necessity entrepreneurs. Clearly, when we had some of the workforce adjustment, people working from home became more of a necessity to look at side hustles and starting more of these micro enterprises. So we're definitely still seeing those upticks in terms of on the front end of starting a business. I think the challenge for us as an industry is making sure that we see the flow through or the ripple effects of starting those new businesses and maturing into wealth creation engines, entities that are establishing jobs. What's interesting for our industry is that we care, but either way, it's still work that needs to be done, right? So in the past environment, when we were looking at these declining rates of entrepreneurship, we needed to do as much as possible to encourage new business startups, to allow those entrepreneurs that were doing startups to be successful. And now the fact that we still have a lot of business startups, we still know that the failure rate that's associated with startups is pretty high. And so there's still so much work that needs to be done by ESOs to connect these entrepreneurs to the resources and people that they need to be successful.
One clarification, I'm going to lose you in a couple minutes, but two little things that you come to mind there. What you have to have an opinion about how much in-person activity matters. We at Technically every Q1 do our realist startups, newsroom curates across our half dozen US markets, some companies 3 years younger that we're paying attention to. And then the newsroom very savvily added a survey. And so we released some interesting data about shy of 100 early stage companies in our markets. And one of the questions was, are you now, or do you expect to be using kind of physical office space or not? And it was roughly half fully remote, half were either in person or working remotely. And I like that data because it was the next generation, right? It wasn't people who were already in motion and made a change, but it was a new generation. Kind of curious, I have to think a lot of your members have a physical footprint. And even if they have online program, I kind of assume they are mostly built for in person. So what's your take on how much we think that place-based entrepreneurial engagement matters and is something different than kind of online?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of place-based entrepreneurial support. Tremendous fan, and one of the major reasons why is because of what it enables, and that it enables community. So it's interesting that oftentimes I've heard the phrase that like entrepreneurship is a team sport, but oftentimes entrepreneurship is a lonely endeavor. When you think about some of the risks that our entrepreneurs are facing, and oftentimes they have no one that they can confide in. If they tell their investors what's really going on, then they're not going to get that next round of investment. If they tell their spouses what's going on, that's going to cause issues. If they tell their employees what's really going on, then they're going to lose their employees. So having these entrepreneurs in a physical space that enables communities and enables trust and sharing is really valuable. When I was previous to being on NBIA's staff, I was actually running a center out of the Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And consistently, when we would have members that would graduate, usually they'll stay in the program for like 3 to 5 years, and we talk about the things that they found most successful. And we would usually talk about the 4 C's. I'm probably going to miss one of the C's, but coaching, capital, consulting, and community. And they would mostly say the most important was community. And so I think the place base facilitates that, and I think that's very important.
Well said. I'm gonna lose you here, but I
Okay.
want to clarify for your members. I don't know the number, but many members around the country. Actually, I should know that. How many members you guys have, even roughly? But some
400 organizations, about 1,000 professionals.
Incredible. So 400 organizations. You mentioned a bunch of the HBCUs, Boise State, Coppin State, and Maryland, University City Science Center. You shouted out. I'm sure there's folks around the country. Are you hearing from members about whether the federal funding freezes, administration changes, is any of that showing up for your members about disrupting programming?
Yeah, so I think is the jury's still out on that. We haven't really seen any information to kind of quantify the impact on that.
Okay.
So clearly, many of our members are receiving funding from federal agencies. The agencies such as the NSF, National Science Foundation, and the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration, SBA, have been strong supporters of this type of work. And so, we're definitely monitoring the situation. And I would say mostly what our members are doing is they're kind of dusting off the playbook and looking at some of their contingency strategies and increasing some of their advocacy work.
And last, I know I went over here, but I always like to hear, why do you do this work? You said you've been doing entrepreneurial support since the 90s.
Yes.
Why is it important to you?
Yeah. So two main reasons. It's fun. Get a chance to work with interesting people, high energy. Some of the and of course the entrepreneurs that they're supporting are also very exciting and interesting and creative. And then the other one is just making a difference. And the story I usually tell about that was back in my early career when I had a chance to attend one of the first celebration parties for an IPO of a company I was affiliated with. And I remember how elated all of these employees were, from the CEO to the office receptionist. And the office receptionist that just turned into a millionaire because of this IPO. And it just showed the power of entrepreneurship. And I enjoy being able to try to unlock that power for other communities.
Charles, well said. Charles Ross, President and CEO of NBIA, the International Business Innovation Association. Its 39th International Conference will be Saturday, April 5th to Wednesday, April 9th in Philadelphia, though their work is quite international and you should follow them. Charles, thank you so much for your time.